I'm Ryan from the Burnout Show, and in this video, I'm going to show you how to install your oil pump and your oil pan. So right here, I've actually got my Chevy 350 that I'm rebuilding, and I'm doing a whole tutorial series on this channel about that whole process. So I've already got a bunch of videos about taking the engine apart, and I'm slowly getting more and more out about rebuilding the engine. So if you're interested in that, definitely subscribe. But let's get to it. So the first thing that you've got to do, if you haven't already, is assemble all of the pieces of your oil pump. If you're ordering an aftermarket pump, then typically the oil pickup won't be already installed, so you will have to go ahead and do that. Sometimes they can be tricky depending on the actual manufacturing of it. Mine was a little out of shape, so it did take some hammering to get it in the correct place, but I've got the bolt-on type, so I had to take out these two bolts so that I could fully install this one. Beyond that, you need to put on the oil drive shaft retaining piece. I highly doubt that's the correct term for it, but that's what I'm going with. It's just this little plastic piece that you stick onto the bottom of the drive shaft sticking out of the oil pump, and that can be a little difficult to put on because it's so tight, but really you just jam it on there. And then you take the other piece of your drive shaft, and it basically looks like a puzzle piece. One has this notch sticking out, the other side is actually like this, where it's missing the notch. And you basically just connect those and push it in until you hear that click. Now we're ready to go ahead and put this on the engine.
Okay, so this is actually super easy. Basically, there's just a couple pins and the drive shaft hole, and you just stick the drive shaft in and line up those pins and slap it on there just like that. You don't need to worry about the positioning of the drive shaft yet, because when you go to install the distributor, you can actually adjust it from the top.
So from here, we just need to grab our bolt, and you'll want to stick this in a little bit of motor oil and get those threads covered. This will make it so that as you're tightening the bolt down, there's less friction, making it easier to tighten the bolt down and then get the proper torque spec. This will help prevent any snags in the threads, which should help prevent any false torque readings. So next, you need to grab your torque wrench and set it to 70 foot-pounds and go ahead and torque that bolt down. Once we've got the oil pump bolt torqued down, we're going to go ahead and grab some RTV. We're going to put a nice clump of RTV on the surface of the block where the cork gasket meets the rubber gasket on all four corners. Due to the fact that the gasket pieces are actually separate from each other, these spots can often leak oil, so putting that RTV there will help create that perfect seal and prevent any oil from leaking. Keep in mind when you're going to place down the cork gaskets that these two pieces are typically slightly different because the block isn't perfectly symmetrical. The gaskets on either side will be slightly different, so make sure that you pick the right one for each side before you put them down. Super simple. You just line up the gasket front and back and then stick it into that RTV. Once you've got those cork pieces laid down, check your RTV again to make sure that there's enough for the rubber gaskets to seal on top of the cork gaskets. Now grab your rubber gaskets, again keeping in mind that these two are different, and then go ahead and place them down on the front and back of the engine. Make sure that they seat properly in the groove and make sure you squeeze them down tight enough on that RTV. Once you've done that, it's time to grab your oil pan and go ahead and place that down over the gaskets. Okay, so all around the oil pan there's 18 bolt holes in total. But keep in mind that the 4 end bolts are actually bigger than the other 14 bolts. I mean, it'll be pretty obvious, but make sure that you don't try to put them in the wrong hole. I'm only starting the threads a little bit with my fingers, and then I'm going to switch to using a speedy wrench. Now the other thing is that the gasket might actually overlap some of these bolt holes a little bit, so just make sure that you try to push that out of the way slightly so that you're not getting that caught. Once you've got all your bolts hand tightened down, you can grab your torque wrench and set it to 12 foot-pounds. And keep in mind you don't want to over torque these too much because squeezing the gaskets too much can actually cause the pan to leak oil. So just keep that in mind, don't over torque. Set it to 12 foot-pounds. And I actually like to go around the pan 2 to 3 times, torquing all the bolts, just to make sure that all the bolts are properly torqued, because as you torque each bolt, the previous bolts get comparatively looser. It's a weird thing to explain, but yeah, basically I just like to go around it 2 to 3 times just to make sure that they are all properly torqued. Once you're done torquing all the bolts, the last thing to do is make sure that your drain plug is tight enough. And after that, You are done. Your oil pump and oil pan are installed and ready to go. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, make sure to hit that like button. Also, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I am doing a whole tutorial series on rebuilding this engine, so definitely subscribe if you're interested in that. And if you have any questions or other ideas for specific tutorials you want to see, make sure you leave those down in the comments. That's going to be it for this video. So, thank you for watching, and I hope this helped.